This is shaping up to be a huge offseason for the San Francisco Giants, but I would argue that last offseason was as well. And last offseason obviously wasn't good enough if this season ended up with an 81-81 record and not making the playoffs. And so I want to revisit, what did they do last year? We graded it at the time. What would I grade it now? Each and every signing that they made. We'll get into it next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, as I mentioned, I want to get into looking back at the moves that the San Francisco Giants made last offseason, because I feel like in some ways we're giving them a little bit of a pass by saying all along this was going to be a huge offseason for them because they have a lot of expiring contracts. Well, last year they had a lot of expiring contracts as well, and what they chose to do was bring a lot of guys back. Crawford was signed to an extension mid-season. Brandon Belt was brought back, and there were other cases of that as well, and they didn't really spend the money on new players. They spent it on bringing back guys, and it made a lot of sense in some ways because they won 107 games, but at the same time, Giants fans are kind of uniquely qualified to point out that we've seen this before, just kind of over relying on these quote core players who have been here a long time. Just the core of this team. I think fans are ready to move on. No offense to Brandon Belt, Brandon Crawford, all those guys, but it's like it's time, right? It's time to turn the page a little bit. So let's look back on what the Giants did last offseason. I gave them a C- for their offseason at the time of last season starting. And what I said was I thought they did a good job with the pitching staff, but I did not think they did enough with the position player group. And so let's look back on what they did. And the first that we're going to go through by total guaranteed money. And the most total guaranteed money went to Carlos Rodon. Total guaranteed $44 million, but the way it was that it was $21.5 million in 2022, and then a opt-out for 2023 if Rodon reached 110 innings, which he did pretty much in the first half of the season, like around the All-Star break. He had already reached this number. And so while Rodon is guaranteed the $22.5 million, he's going to choose not to take it because he can do better on the open market by re-entering free agency. But there's just no doubt that this ended up being a slam dunk signing, and the Giants do have a good track record in their off-season moves and free agent signings under Farhan Zaidi of bringing in frontline starting pitching, and often, almost exclusively on short-term deals, right? Like Kevin Gausman ended up being a top of the rotation arm for the Giants, and he was brought in basically on consecutive one-year deals. And then he ended up getting a 5-year deal from the Toronto Blue Jays for $110-ish million, and 120, 15, 110, I think. And for Rodon, he's likely to get something similar, if not better. But the 1 year that the Giants had Rodon, he made 31 starts. He didn't make his last start only because the Giants had been eliminated. He pitched 178 innings. He had a ridiculously good 33.4% strikeout rate. He had a 2.88 ERA, but peripherals that were even better than that, a fielding independent pitching of 2.25, expected ERA of 2.64. He just couldn't really have been much better. He was dominant, he was an ace, and it was a great signing. And I view it the same now as I viewed it when they signed him. I thought it was a great signing at the time, and it ended up being a great signing indeed. So the next signing that the Giants made in terms of total committed money was to Anthony DeSclafani. And this is a totally different story in terms of pretty much the opposite result as Carlos Rodon, but we're talking about $36 million over 3 years. And so they weren't paying him to be a frontline arm, right? Carlos Rodon was getting about a little more than 10 million more per season than Anthony DeSclafani. So 3 years, 36 million. Obviously, to the average person, $36 million is a ton of money. But to a major league player, 12 million a year is not worth all that much. Let's just say that in 2021, Fangraphs pegs DeSclafani's value that he provided in 2021 at $24.3 million. Like if you were to just pay season by season, and if you knew you were going to get 2021 Anthony DeSclafani for 1 year, it would be worth about $24 million to teams. So in some ways, it's kind of fair that this year he produced what Fangraphs pegs at $0 of value, because, you know, 12 million per year over the 2 years. And in his first year, when he produced $24 million of value, they were paying him what, $3 million? And then in the second year of DeSclafani, but the first year of this new 3-year deal, produces $0 million of value. So he obviously had the ankle injury, and he only made 5 starts, pitched 19 innings, and then he had season-ending surgery. He ends up with a 6.63 ERA on the season. I really do believe you can kind of throw out the numbers because A, it's a tiny sample, and B, he was hurt. He was so hurt that he required season-ending surgery. And so, I don't know, it's a little bit too early to judge, and I think that it's crazy to me. We see so many fans like saying, how can they get rid of Anthony DeSclafani? The money is spent, right? You don't get the money back. And so what they should be doing is trying to make sure he's healthy and that he can get back to being the version of himself that he was in 2021 when he had a 3.17 ERA, peripherals a little bit worse, expected ERA of 3.89, fielding independent pitching of 3.62. But overall, I mean, he was just rock solid for the Giants. And maybe a lot of people only tuned in the playoffs and are judging him based on his one playoff start in the NLDS when he pitched an inning and 2/3 and gave up a bunch of runs. Also, he didn't pitch well in the regular season frequently against the Dodgers. But other than that, I mean, he got them there, right? If he can just get you there, maybe you don't need to throw him in a playoff series, in a short series at least. And I mean, he made 31 starts. He was healthy and good. 3.17 ERA. Let's not sleep on that. So the priority should be getting him healthy. But all in all, it's certainly a deal that after 1 year looks regrettable. But I just want to point out it's a small, modest deal. It's not a $120 million deal. It's $36 million over 3 years. So it's not like killing you, but it wasn't good in year one, and so I certainly can't give it a great grade at this point in time. And if he was a free agent now, he would be a guy who would get a small 1 year deal again, given he's coming off a significant injury. So coming up in just a minute, we're going to look at the other signings the Giants made. More pitchers, the next couple guys, Alex Wood and Alex Cobb. One good, one not so good, and we'll get to all the other signings as well in just a minute. But before we do, betonline.net is your number one source for betting football and the start of the new basketball season. I can't believe 49ers are already deep into their season. Warriors have gotten going here, and you can check out all the action for that as well as the baseball offseason. BetOnline was, we made a whole show about this the other day. Their latest Aaron Judge odds, if he leaves the Yankees, had the Giants as the most likely destination for Aaron Judge. And you can see how the betting markets move at betonline.net. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, still World Series action you can bet on, and then all the off-season stuff, not just Judge, but others. MMA, boxing, golf as well. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, as promised, we are going to continue looking at the Giants' offseason from last year because, ultimately, I gave him a C-. I know I've said this a million times if you've heard me say it a lot. Not everyone remembers that, so I'm just pointing it out. C- is not great. I thought the idea behind a C- was that they passed, but it was just barely. Like, I just thought they didn't. I thought they would do enough to like sneak into the playoffs towards the back end of it. Certainly didn't think they were going to win the division again based on the offseason they had. But yeah, we'll look at it. We'll revisit it now that the season is over, and hopefully learn some lessons from last offseason in terms of it wasn't enough, and it led to them not making the playoffs. Wasn't entirely from the offseason. Anyway, we'll keep going on that. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. For your second listen today, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. So the next signing in terms of total guaranteed money was to Alex Wood, who got a 2-year, $25 million contract from the Giants. Just like Anthony DeSclafani, coming off a really good season in 2021. You could even make a case in some ways Alex Wood was better. The ERA wasn't better. I would say they were pretty similar, and Anthony DeSclafani was more durable than Alex Wood in 2021. But Wood, I mean, in year one with the Giants, I think it was a 1-year, $6 million contract in 2021, and he was just rock solid. Made 26 starts, 138 and 2/3 innings, 3.83 ERA, 3.89 fielding independent pitching, 3.48 fielding independent pitching, 3.89 expected ERA. So yeah, actually DeSclafani was better, and I think DeSclafani's contract reflects that. 3 years, $36 million. And for Wood, he gets just about the same average annual value, $500,000 more per year, but only 2 years, as opposed to 3 for DeSclafani. And not exactly the same as DeSclafani because he was hurt, but Wood, he ended up going on the IL and being shut down towards the end, but he did make the exact same number of starts this year, 26, as he made last year. And following up at 3.83 ERA in 2021, it was 5.10 in 2022. Expected ERA was 4.00, not that much higher than last year's 3.89, although run prevention was more prevalent in 2022 across the league. So actually, even if it was the exact same, I may have just done it again. Not FIP, but expected ERA was 4, and the year prior was 3.89. Even if they were exactly the same, it's worse in 2022 because the league average ERA and expected ERA went down significantly in 2022. So it was just undoubtedly a worse season for Wood. Some of the peripheral numbers: fielding independent pitching, 3.76. Expected fielding independent pitching, 3.41. So in a lot of ways, he massively underperformed some of the peripheral numbers, as did the next guy we're going to talk about in Alex Cobb. And so a lot of this perhaps can be explained by just shoddy defense behind Alex Wood, but it just was a poor season for Alex Wood in a lot of ways. And just like with Anthony DeSclafani, this looks like a regrettable contract. However, I don't feel horrible about having Alex Wood and Anthony DeSclafani under contract for next year. I think that both are solid rebound candidates. They have a track record of at least being decent, and in many cases much better than that. They're not aces, but I think they can at least be average major league starters and probably better, as we saw in 2021. So in a lot of ways, they regressed, just like we talked about yesterday with Brandon Belt and Brandon Crawford. There was regression kind of to the extreme with Alex Wood from a performance standpoint and DeSclafani from a health standpoint, just like with Belt and Crawford with health and underperformance. So it's hard for me to give this one a good grade either. I do like the fact that it's only one more year for Alex Wood, so that's kind of the beauty of these shorter term deals. If you make a 5-6 year commitment and then it goes poorly right in the beginning, then it really starts to look like a potential albatross. But when they're short term, even if it goes poorly 1 year, it's like, okay, well, one more year and then it's done. So that's Alex Wood. Hopefully he can rebound. I think he can, and possibly, maybe likely will. Next contract looks like a real good one for the Giants, and that is Alex Cobb at a 2-year, $20 million guarantee, but it actually is potentially more than that, with the Giants holding a club option for a third year. So $220 guaranteed, and the Giants can bring him back for another year at $10 million. So had an interesting season in 2021. It wasn't with the Giants. He was with the Angels. He only made 18 starts, only threw 93 and a third innings. But this is one of those cases where the peripheral numbers were really good and the Giants bought into it. And it's again, like the DeSclafani, the Wood, and the Cobb contracts you're not paying for ace production. You're kind of paying for back end starter type production. And I think you're at least going to get that. And then there's the potential for better. And that's what happened with Alex Cobb. While the ERA was actually not great at 3.73, still better than league average. The expected ERA was all the way down at 3.15, and the fielding independent pitching at 2.80. He struck out guys at an above average rate and had one of the best ground ball rates in the game. I think he was second or third. Yeah, I think he was second in Major League Baseball behind only Framber Valdez of the Houston Astros at a 61.5% rate of balls in play being ground balls. And that's really, really good. Keeping the ball on the ground has all kinds of benefits, but you really do want premium infield defenders when you have a player like this, and the Giants didn't have that this year. And I think that explains why the ERA was so much higher than the peripherals and the expected ERA and all that. So anyway, I think it's very much a good thing that the Giants have Alex Cobb under contract for 2023, and having a club option is just always a good thing, and they have that. Having a club option on a player who performed really well for you early in the deal it looks good. And so it's great to have Alex Cobb locked up. It was a really solid season for him. Made 28 starts and pitched 149 and 2/3 innings, the most innings he's thrown since 2018 when he pitched 152 and a third. So in just a minute, we're going to get to the other players remaining. The significant ones here, Brandon Belt, Jock Peterson. We'll get into those contracts and ultimately give out a grade in hindsight as to how the Giants did over last offseason and how it compared to my initial grade I gave them prior to the season. So we'll talk about all of that in just a minute. But first, all right, as promised, the final couple of signings, as you can see, I mean, this was really pitcher heavy. In fact, we've only talked about starting pitchers at this point, and that was my beef with the offseason, was that their biggest commitments, we're talking Rodon, DeSclafani, Wood, and Cobb, nobody else got over a 1-year deal. So the only multi-year deals they gave out last offseason were to starting pitchers, and they were all 2-year guarantees except DeSclafani got 3. So whatever. Their starting rotation ended up being one of the better rotations in the game. When you look at ERA, especially when you look at peripheral numbers like fielding independent pitching, I think they were first by a mile in fielding independent pitching, which, again, think about the name, fielding independent pitching, and their fielding stunk in 2022. And so it explains a lot as to why the ERA was higher than the fielding independent pitching. So they did a good job, I thought. Even though Wood and DeSclafani were big disappointments, they still, because Rodon was so good, Webb just continued to be good after his breakout 2021, and Cobb was rock solid and even better than that at times, despite some really poor luck and really bad defense behind him at times, that they ended up being one of the better rotations in the game. And I think no team would have wanted any part of Rodon, Webb, and Cobb starting a postseason series. The Giants, just like the Phillies with Nola and Wheeler, would have had a shot in like every game with those guys on the mound, I think. But that's on the position player side, it was a different story. They did not do a good job. Brandon Belt was brought back on the $18.4 million qualifying offer, which he could have rejected, but he accepted. And the Giants have been aggressive with the qualifying offer. It's how they brought back Kevin Gausman for the second year. They've given it to Will Smith, who rejected it and got a multi-year deal, which didn't end up being a great deal for the team. Good deal for Smith. But anyway, so I like that the Giants are willing to use this. It emphasizes that they're willing to spend money, but they prefer like shorter term. So for Belt, it's like a hefty amount to pay, but it's like you're capping it at 1 year. And so it was aggressive and he took it, and that's how they brought him back. And so it's hard for me to criticize this, but it didn't work out. I thought it was the right move at the time, and I'll defend that it was the right move, but it certainly didn't work out. We did a deep dive on Brandon Belt and Brandon Crawford yesterday, and essentially Belt was a below average hitter and just provided a net nothing overall as a major leaguer in 2022. In terms of what was the production worth for Belt, Fangraph says $0.2 million, $200,000 is what that means. Whereas in 2021, even though he only played 97 games in 2021, Fangraphs has the production worth $27.2 million in 97 games. And in 2020, which was a short season, it says the production was worth $15.7 million. And that was in 51 games for Belt, like $1 million a game. Okay, right? No, not 50 million. What am I talking about? What did I say? 15 million. I'm tripping. Not $1 million a game, but still a lot given he only played 50 whatever games because it was a short season. So what that tells me is that it was a slam dunk like decision to give him the qualifying offer, and it just didn't work out. And another example of how the regression was so severe that this is what kept them out of the playoffs. All they needed when all was said and done was 6 more wins to make the playoffs. And, you know, if the regression wasn't so steep for Belt, for DeSclafani, for Wood, and even for Crawford, like they would have made the playoffs. And so, yeah, Belt, the beauty of the 1-year deal, this is what I'm saying, is that it's over. It was a bad one, and you're like, wow, that escalated quickly in a negative direction, if that makes any sense. The beauty of the 1-year deal is that you can pivot and say, okay, great, it didn't work out, but now we can change course. And so that may ultimately be what ends up happening. Obviously, Belt legendary in San Francisco, and a lot of the success over the last decade attributable to his production and presence on the roster. But it may be the last year he's played in a Giants uniform. So that one did not end up working out. The next deal, Jock Peterson, 1 year, $6 million. This was one where I started to get a little pessimistic at the time because at that point, there was like almost no impact talent left. Pretty sure Trevor Story was like the last impact talent left, and he had just signed with the Boston Red Sox. And it's like Giants signed Jock Peterson to a 1 year, $6 million deal. And it was like, this is your big offseason addition on the position player side? Because really, that's it. And Brandon Belt, he was obviously being brought back. He wasn't brought in from the outside. So their one significant addition in free agency on the position player side was simply Jock Peterson. And while he basically lived up to the best version of himself, except defensively, he was the worst version of himself. But offensively, he was exactly as advertised. But unfortunately, it's just a limited profile. What you're getting in Jock Peterson is a platoon player who's not great defensively, doesn't run particularly well, doesn't hit lefties well at all. And, I mean, he was okay against lefties in a tiny sample. They really limited his exposure against lefties. Overall, popular player in the clubhouse, very popular with fans, and was a real threat offensively. Ended up with a 144 weighted runs created plus. Again, though, limiting exposure against lefties. He did what he was supposed to do, which was be an impact platoon player. But they needed more than that. And so when all was said and done, they just simply didn't do enough on the position player side, which is exactly what we said at the time. And so it was the regression of some guys that kept them from doing just enough to sneak into the playoffs, which I thought they would do. But there so many guys got worse and or were hurt more that they didn't make the playoffs. And so, yeah, they should have been able to see this coming in a lot of ways. And this offseason, they're going to have to do differently. The good thing is that the pitching is, like I mentioned, with every guy except Rodon, they're all signed for at least one more year. And so, yes, you've got to worry about replacing Rodon with somebody else or with Rodon himself. And you got to worry a little bit about the bullpen, maybe a lot about the bullpen. But last year, only Logan Webb was under contract for 2022 after the 2021 season. And so they had to worry about filling out their entire rotation, and they did a good job. Jacob Junis, by the way, I didn't even mention him. He, Matthew Boyd, Trevor Rosenthal, and Carlos Martinez were also picked up. Martinez was a minor league deal, but Junis ended up being good and bad at various times, and a solid addition for $1.75 million. Another solid rotation addition or pitching addition. But where are the position player additions? They needed to do more, and they need to do more this offseason. And so they're going to have to do that. And I think that they're turning their attention to that. And it's really not something they've done in a long time. And especially, I mean, including under Farhan Zaidi, where's the significant position player addition? It hasn't happened yet. The biggest, I think, contract for a position player was to Tommy La Stella and Wilmer Flores afterwards. But those guys are like role players, and I think they're in need of some impact talent, and this could be the offseason we finally see it. So anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like the show, please consider rating it. Thumbs up, subscribe, bell notification, whatever you can do. Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.